Before you buy it, you have to smack the rice.
Why do you slap the rice?
It feels good. It feels good.
I just said, yes, man, right away, anything.
Okay kids, today we're going to make Baiju. If you don't know what it is, it's a clear all-grain spirit from China that's made in a single pot still run. And currently it is the most widely consumed spirit on the planet. You might be wondering why you haven't heard of this stuff before. And honestly, it's probably because of the taste. But we're going to get into that in a second. Just a quick note here. This is going to be a pretty long video, I think. So if you want to skip to this time code, that's where the recipe starts. Everything in the middle is important information, but I know you guys love to skip half of my videos. So go ahead. Since it's an all-grain spirit, technically I guess it fits more in the whiskey category than anywhere else. It's most commonly made from sorghum and millet, but in southeastern China it's very often made from short grain rice, just like sake. We're gonna make the rice version today, but eventually I'm gonna make a version with sorghum just to see what the differences are. So what does Baiju actually taste like? Well, it can be pretty harsh and have some unique flavors that Westerners don't really like. It's not what you'd call an approachable spirit. It's generally served between 50 and 65% ABV, so right out of the bottle it's trying to pick a fight. Also, the desirable flavors in Baiju come from a heavy reliance on the heads and the tails. Flavors like potpourri, rotten fruit, soy sauce, and sometimes nail polish remover. But there's also a rice scented or rice essence Baiju, and that's what we're gonna go for today. My goal here is to use Baiju brewing and distilling techniques to end up making a finished product that is more suited to the Western palate, specifically my palate. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to crap on Baiju. There's like a billion people that drink it, and there are distilleries in China that are like 500 years old that have been making it using traditional techniques combined with like hard science, like nerds in lab coats, to specifically get those harsher flavors in their finished product on purpose. This is what they want. I know that my American tongue prefers sweet flavors, fruity flavors, grainy flavors, stuff like that. So that's what we're aiming for today. If you want to see the video that inspired me to make Baiju in the first place, check out this link right up here. It's to a YouTube channel called Drunkard Lee. Now, granted, all of it's in Chinese and only some of the videos have subtitles, but you can kind of figure out what's going on just by watching. That's the cool thing about having a physical, practical hobby, is if you watch someone else's video in another language, you pretty much figure out what they're doing. So I've been wanting to do this project since I saw that first video before the pandemic, and I've been working on this for almost 2 years because I dug myself into such a deep research hole. Now that I've dug myself out of that nerd pit, I'm finally ready to share this project with you guys. So let's cover the basics. How is Baiju even made? It's pretty simple. You start off by washing your grain and then steaming it. And like I said, a lot of Baiju is made with sorghum or millet, but today we're going to use short grain rice. Short grain rice has a lot more starch in it than medium or long grain rice, so that's what we're going to be using, because more starch means more potential sugar to ferment into alcohol. So after it's cooked, the grain is then cooled off and mixed with some yeast and a special mold that converts the starches into sugars so that it can then be fermented. If you're familiar with sake brewing, then you know where this is going. So there is no grain mashing process where you steep the grain at 145 to activate your amylase enzymes, because there's no malt in the process at all. The mold does everything for you. It produces those enzymes and it breaks down the starches into sugars at room temperature. So once you have everything mixed together, you let the mold convert the starches into sugars, and then the yeast takes the sugars and converts those into alcohol, all at the same time. Crazy, right? And since those two processes are happening concurrently, it takes a lot longer to ferment. A normal whiskey mash can be done in 3 to 7 days, but a mold-based fermentation can take a month or more. Recently, Jesse did a video on the Still It channel where he used kind of a turbocharged version of this process with a product called Angel Yellow Label yeast. For some reason, through some sort of science, theirs works really, really fast. And you can check his video out right up here. So the other drawback for using mold is that you can't tell what your starting gravity is, because there is no sugar in the beginning of the fermentation. it's all starch. The sugar all gets converted from the starch little by little during the entire fermentation process. So what you do is you figure out the probable starting gravity based on the ratio of the weight of the grain and the volume of the water. 5 pounds of rice in 1 gallon of water will give you about a 20% ABV, 19 to 20%, assuming everything goes right. I'm recommending at least 3.5 to 4 pounds per gallon of water because you want this thing to get up above 10% ABV just to fight off any sort of bacterial infections that can happen, and I'll get into that in a minute. So in sake brewing, they use a mold called Aspergillus oryzae, also known as koji in Japan. And koji is one of those molds that's specially evolved to produce those amylase enzymes to convert your starches into sugars. Aspergillus oryzae is used throughout Asia for alcohol production, but also to make soy sauce by fermenting soybeans. But today, we're not going to use koji. We're going to use another mold that does the same thing called Monascus purpureus. It's also known as red yeast rice, but the word yeast is a misnomer in there because it's not a yeast, it's a mold. Let's see if we can focus in on this. Red yeast rice is basically just grains of rice with this Monascus purpureus that's been propagated to grow on the rice, and then they dry it out so it stops growing. And you may have heard of red yeast rice before because very often it's a dietary supplement to help treat high cholesterol. Don't bother running to the health food store and picking up a bottle of red yeast rice capsules because that shit won't work. I tried it already. I'm pretty sure they sterilize it before they turn it into a supplement. You need to get this stuff online, or if you're lucky enough to have an Asian market somewhere near you, then just go and look for this stuff. It's in a ton of different Chinese and Korean dishes. So it's gonna be probably with the spices, maybe also with the rice. But if you're like me and you don't have easy access to an Asian grocery store nearby, then I put an Amazon link for this stuff down in the video description. So the only problem with this stuff is that occasionally it will have some bacteria mixed in there. It's not a scientifically isolated culture to make this stuff because ultimately it's a food product. It's an immediate use thing that you don't usually have to worry about that stuff. On one of my previous batches, I got an Acetobacter infection in my brew, and I ended up making 15 gallons of vinegar rice mush. And that was really disappointing. I almost cried. So you can try to freeze this stuff at like dry ice temperatures to kill any potential bacteria, but it's probably going to take you several days to do that, and it's a little bit process prohibitive. But the other thing you can do is, like I said, just make sure that your brew is going to hit over 10% ABV by making sure that you're at 3.5 to 4 pounds of rice per gallon of water so that you hit that ABV, and that'll pretty much eliminate any chance of a bacterial infection. The reason why I'm choosing this stuff rather than the koji is because I want to go with as much authenticity and adhering to the traditional recipe as I can for the regional Baiju that I'm trying to make, which is pretty much what Zhao Li made in her videos on her Drunkardly channel. The other reason is the flavor. This stuff gives you some really fantastic flavors. I did a little baby test of it with some rice, and I let it propagate for a little while, and it ended up tasting like Starburst candy. So the flavors you get from this stuff are worth the effort, in my opinion. Okay, that's enough about the mold. For the most part, in China, Baiju brewing is done in something called solid state fermentation, meaning they cook the grain with steam, but they don't make a wash. There's no slurry of grain and liquid. There's no strained liquid to then ferment. It's just this kind of damp grain bed with the yeast and the mold mixed into it, and then they throw it in earthen pits and they let it ferment for like 3 months and leave it alone. We're not doing that today because that's something I am not prepared to test yet. So today we're actually just going to make a wine. We're just going to make a big ass tub of rice wine. As far as how they distill Baiju, it's a really interesting system. So you don't have a wash to pour into a boiler and then run through a still like 99% of every other spirit produced on this planet. You just have this kind of mushy grain bed. So what do you do with it? Well, they have these really cool stills called heavenly pots or sky pots. the boiler has water in it, and the column is almost the same size as the mouth of the boiler. It's a big bamboo thing. They fill it full of grain, and then they put the still head on top, and the still head just collects the steam and it rains down the edges and then out the pipe. It's a really fascinating system. But what I've noticed about how they distill is they just run it. I mean, it is running hot and fast. From all the videos that I've seen, it's just blowing. And it doesn't matter if it's at the industrial scale where they're cooking a few tons of the grain, or at like the home scale where they're doing like 50 to 100 pounds. And I would love to test one of those out. I can't find any on like AliExpress. If there are any Heavenly Pot still manufacturers out there that would like for me to test one out on my channel, send me an email. So I don't have a Heavenly Pot, but I do have a thumper. And with my thumper, I can hypothetically pack in some of my grain mush and run the vapor through that to approximate the process. So that, in a very large nutshell, is how they make Baiju. And the reason why I gave you a deep dive into the entire process and some of the cultural aspects is because there's actually some really valuable techniques in there that I think we need to explore going forward. I want to look at solid state fermentation. I want to do some more experiments with the mold. You know, I figure the best way to do that is to dive right in and try to make this stuff as authentically as I can, so that going forward I have a base to work from. You know, it's not all just, you know, theoretical knowledge. Okay, so on to the recipe that we're using today. For this project, I'm doing 25 pounds of rice and 7 gallons of water. And in my batch, I only did 1 pound of the red yeast rice, but I'm recommending that you guys do 1 pound for every 5 pounds of rice, not 1 pound for 25 pounds of rice. You're also gonna need some yeast nutrient, and I'll put a link for this down in the video description, and some EC 1118. I'm recommending this champagne yeast because it ferments very cleanly and it's got a super high alcohol tolerance at 20%, 20 to 21%. Stupid bifocals. Yeah, I gotta wear bifocals now. Damn. So about 7 tablespoons of this for your big fat 25 pounds of rice, and 2 packets. 2 packets of the yeast. And how much of this? 1 pound, or 1 package. They're 14-ounce packages. So one of these packages, roughly a pound for every 5 pounds of grain. The reason why I'm recommending you go that high is because 1 pound for every 25 pounds of rice, it just converted too slowly. There wasn't enough mold in there to make it go at a normal rate. And usually this stuff should get done in about a month. Mine took 3-ish. And so my wife wasn't really happy with having a giant tub of slowly dissolving red rice mush in the bathtub in our guest bathroom. So, sorry, honey. Okay, so first things first, dump all the rice into a big ass tub and wash it several times. Fill the tub with water, rinse it out, and do that 2 or 3 times until the water comes out clear. And then refill the tub and let it sit overnight. The next day you're gonna drain off the water and then steam the rice for about an hour or more. I recommend doing 5-pound batches at a time, no more. I know that sounds like a pain in the butt, but you'll get a much more thorough cooking on the rice, so it's up to you. And you want the rice to be fully cooked so that the mold can actually penetrate all the way through each of the grains and chew them up and turn them into sugars for you. After it's cooked, dump your rice into your fermenter and let it cool to about room temperature, and then dump in your red yeast rice, your yeast, and your yeast nutrient. Stir it up really well and then top it up with water. Or put the water in first, it doesn't matter. If you want to help this stuff along, you can skip the water for a day or two and let the mold sort of start propagating on the rice that it's touching without the water in there. And that'll help it to grow a little bit faster so that maybe it'll speed up your conversion. I don't know, I haven't tested that, but I've seen that a few times. So it's up to you. So as it ferments, you want to come by and stir it with a sanitized spoon at least every 2 or 3 days. And just kind of keep an eye on it, and eventually everything's going to slump down to the bottom and turn into sludge. When you go in to stir it, if you don't get any more CO2 bubbles being released, then it's done. And you can give it another week to sit there and you know, see if it's going to do any more. But once it stops releasing CO2, you're most likely done. And that can take anywhere from 30 days to 90 days, depending on how much of this stuff you actually put in with your rice. So mine's done. Let's go have a taste and get it siphoned into buckets. This is my bathroom. This is what the wine looks like after it's fermented. No, I'm not dissolving a body in my bathroom this time. This doesn't smell like rice at all. It smells like fruit wine. It smells like I got strawberries and grape and kiwi and really bright fruit flavors. Very alcoholic, but very, very nice fruit flavors. Let's have a little taste. Yeah, really, really nice, bright, crisp flavors. It kind of reminds me of like a Pinot Grigio or something. That's good. It's definitely got some tartness to it though, which is interesting. But, you know, not like vinegar or anything. I know what that tastes like. Since the wine tastes so good, you can just bottle it up, or you can siphon it into your boiler and do something else with it, hypothetically. To get the last dregs out of your stuff here, you can take a colander like I did and press that down in there as deep as you can, and then lower your wand down in there and restart the siphon, because it's going to pull everything from all the way around at a much lower level. Now mostly we have the mush, and if you want you can strain the mush and then let that settle over time, especially if you cold crash it, maybe add some gelatin to it, it'll definitely settle out so that you have more clear wine. But I recommend, if you have a thumper, try something a little different. You can just put some of the rice sludge down into the thumper and run your product through that to pull more flavor and to extract any residual alcohol in there. Now, as far as actually how you might distill this as a hobbyist, you could do a stripping run and then a spirit run if you want to, but when they're making this stuff, they just do a single run. And if you're running through a thumper, then I would say you probably don't need to do a stripping run. But, you know, of course, make that assessment after you've done your first run. Even if you want to do a stripping run, maybe run normal instead of super hot, just so you can figure out what flavors you get, in case it's good the way it is. I don't know, but I always recommend collecting in 200 milliliter increments in your jars, and then cover them with paper towels or coffee filters or something and let them air out overnight, so that you can figure out where those funky flavors are and where the good stuff is and where the other funky stuff is, and make your cuts really easily the next day. Before we move on to the assessment and the blending, I want to take a second to thank each and every one of my Patreon members for supporting my channel. I really love having other nerds to talk to about this stuff and bounce ideas off of. I could not do this without your help, so thank you very much. If you want to consider supporting me on Patreon to get early access and input on what I do around here, check out the link to my Patreon page down in the video description. If you distill this, you're going to have an interesting experience. The wine is very fruity. As the wine is heating up, it's incredibly fruity, like cherries and, you know, all kinds of just boom, fruit all over the place. But when you actually get the distillate, it's really not very fruity at all, which was rather surprising to me. I will say that there was a lot less heads than I expected, but the fruity character, the really potent fruity essences that I was smelling, they're really not in here that much. There's a tiny bit of like cherry and apple, but not a whole lot. I mean, way less than I expected, especially if you're going to use the thumper, because you're reinfusing that flavor through the entire run. There's a little bit of a kind of a fake sweetness. There's a little bit of ricey character to it, but not much. It's really subtle. It smells like a nice spirit. I tasted some a few days ago and it was nice, but it was kind of indistinct. There was some licoricey notes, not a whole lot on the aroma side, but just a little faint licoricey note in there. So this has been sitting for 2 days. It's 56%. I'm not going to proof it down because, you know, it's Baiju. So give it a taste. Yeah, there's some black licorice in there. So black licorice and a fruity character that is kind of nondescript. It's almost like a little bit of red licorice. I'm kind of getting that kind of weird nondescript fruit flavor with some rice, cooked rice, and licorice. It's earthy, it's rich, it's got some astringency on the back of the tongue. Not a lot though. I like this. So generally, Baiju is not aged on wood. It's aged in big clay vessels, big clay jars, or, you know, stainless steel vats if they're doing it at the industrial scale. So it's not aged on wood, but there is some esterification, some changes in the flavor just through natural chemistry that's going to happen in those jars. I'm interested to see what this is going to taste like in about a year. I think the next time I do a Baiju experiment, I'm going to do the solid state fermentation with some sorghum and some millet. But when we complete that project and I post that video, we'll go ahead and do a follow-up tasting of this. For right now, I'm actually really happy with this. I think this stuff would make a really good base for absinthe, you know? So like distilled to a higher proof than 56%, maybe, you know, 80 or 90, and then macerate all your herbs in it. And so you're already gonna have that complex flavor, not just a neutral. And I think that might be really good. Yeah, this is really tasty. It's got a little bit of sweet aroma to it and a sweet flavor. It's a tiny bit hot, but it's not like razor blades like some people have described. It's really very delicious. The one Baiju I had a really strong rotten pineapple flavor to it. It was definitely hotter than this. I think that's just a heavier reliance on the head's content for those flavor compounds, because this is definitely more subtle, but it's really good. Yeah. This was a success. I dig this. So yeah, it can take you a month to do it, and you have to baby it as far as, you know, stirring it every couple of days. But you know, this is a hobby. We're doing this because it's fun to fiddle around with stuff. I think I'm gonna go ahead and age some because the licorice in here and the sweetness I think would do really well with some wood. Patrons, if you're watching, I'm gonna put a vote over on the Patreon site so you can vote on some wood types, because I need your input on this. I'll put on my tasting notes in, and then we can talk about it over there on the Patreon site. All right, that's the tasting done. Now I have to go edit this video. I'm so glad I did this. The culmination of 2 years of research and f***ing around. I'm just glad that it worked out so that I could finally share it with you guys. I've been sitting on this one forever. All right, well, if you like this video, do me a favor and hit the like button. It really helps out the channel, and it lets YouTube know that this is content that they should keep promoting to other viewers. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them down in the comments section down below. If you're not subscribed to my channel, you probably should, so that you get notified when I post new content. Otherwise, you're just missing out. So hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon right next to it, and that will set your notifications. All right, thanks for watching. Talk at you later.